Thank you very much for this introduction and the invitation to present our project here at the CCS in Paris. And of course, thank you for coming and all the interest in the audience. So this is Li, I'm Alessandro. We are, as explained, part of this collective group of 4 people with Ani Vihervaara and Matt van der Ploeg. We all work and teach at the ETH and do projects together. So basically how the whole journey began of us was that Pro Helvetia, the commissioner in Switzerland, which is responsible for the national pavilion at the Biennale in Venice, for the first time announced an open call, a public competition, where like around 80 offices from the whole country applied. And they searched this time, which I think is really great, for the first time, to have a strong idea instead of just giving it directly to a famous architect. So how we convinced the jury in the end was that we wanted to address a topic which is not visible. It's so familiar that it has become forgotten: the architecture of the contemporary housing interior. With only slight variations due to culture and climate, it consists of a volume roughly 240 centimeters in height, dressed with wide walls, parquet, floor, and off-the-shelf fittings. So the architectural shell, which is very similar worldwide, with only minor variations. To go over a little bit about our research. So from the beginning we were always treating this project as an ongoing research. So we did not start with somehow a pre-existing message we wanted to proclaim, but our work and teaching always tries to be an investigation into some aspect of architecture. We want to look with the eyes more of amateurs than experts, and also to use somehow a naivete in order to find surprises and discover new ways of seeing the environment. So in this sense, we began the project without a too particular expertise in housing, so we didn't build like hundreds of flats, but we started to look at them very fundamentally. So we actually wanted to open up a discourse which is not existing on a current architectural topic and start to raise questions more than give answers. Atelier Kempetil is talking about the housing situation in the Netherlands. The interior is reduced and standardized to such a degree that there is simply no work for architects to do anymore. There are no interior photos because they're all the same. All apartments have the same cheap stairs, walls, doors, etc. No matter if it's luxury or social housing, the next step will be that the interior as such will completely disappear. Or Jacques Herzog to the same topic: housing is the worst. Social housing regulations make any idea about the plan and the interior space impossible. No architect can change that. These attitudes are very much reflected in a small video we wanted to show of a television series. You maybe know Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Larry David goes to the house Susie just moved in.
I just go where the wife tells me to go.
No, yeah, well, don't we all? Look at this place.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Hold on one second. Got the script for you right here. Read it, tell me what you think, and we'll see what happens.
Hey, La.
Hey, yeah.
Is this something?
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's wonderful.
We're so happy
it's a
here,
beautiful
aren't we,
house.
honey?
We sure are.
So come on, I'll give you the tour.
Oh, you know what? That's okay. I get it.
What do you mean?
Well, you know, it's bedrooms, bathrooms. I get it. I see it. It's beautiful. It's great.
You don't want a tour?
You don't need to walk me
All right,
around
get the
house.
fuck out of my house, okay, Larry? Just get the fuck out right now.
All right, fine. I'll take the house tour.
No, I'm done. I'm over it. I'm turned off. Leave. Get the fuck out, okay? freak of fucking nature doesn't want a house tour.
Susie, I'll take the house.
No tour for you.
I will have lunch tomorrow, don't forget.
Okay, lunch tomorrow.
So yes, you see it. I mean, this small architectural standoff performed by Larry and Susie reflects a really long-standing divide between architecture, housing, and the interior. So whereas Susie understands the interior as a succession of like scenes, Larry understands housing via the comprehensive overview of the floor plan, bedroom, bathrooms, kitchens, and so forth. In this sense, he sees the house as an architect. Larry doesn't need to have the house tour because he already can see it in his eyes. He knows somehow the basic plan, the diagram, how it is compositioned. This dispute can also be seen if you start to compare like the whole architecture books, which is really divided in between architecture and the interior, the shell. So what we discovered is that somehow the architects took over the plan and the whole material presence has been given over to the interior, to pop culture and to other design fields. This separation of dwelling into housing as plan and housing as image, you can really see when you start also to have a look at all the plan manuals, the Grundrissfibel and so forth. So for architects, this is somehow represented by the featuring of the plans, and for everything else, from the interior design publications to home furnishing, blogs and television shows, the interior is represented almost exclusively by furnished interior house tour image. So what we realized then, when we started to look at all the homepages of architects in Switzerland and worldwide, we realized we came across so many unfurnished apartments photographs published in the last years, which was somehow a revelation for us. It signaled that a shift has been taking place in how architects and elsewhere are conceived of housing. For us, this shifts the challenge, or challenges the tradition of the invisible interior, and somehow architects possibly started to discover the interior shell as an architectural topic again.
So for what we can see here is that the Swiss embrace the house tour. And not only these images, but also the literal open house tour is a Swiss tradition where architects invite other architects and interested people for a tour before the house gets occupied. But also quotes like these from Roger Diener, for example, hint toward an understanding of architecture that is not only creating meaning through the plan. When he says, and this is a translation to English from German, which is kind of okay. But I do not want to talk about architecture as we do, as designers do, when we discuss buildings, grand plans, and apartment typologies. Instead, I would like to start from the rear, that is in the flat itself. It is a phenomenological view of housing construction. It is about observations on the objects themselves. The phenomenology Roger Diener is talking about here could also be described as the return of the real, which first was described by Hal Foster in his book with the same title from 1996. After the models of art as text and art in the 70s and art as simulacrum as in the 80s, Foster suggests that we are now witness to a return to the real, to art and theory grounded in the materiality of actual bodies and social sites. And looking at architecture in a phenomenological I have problems with that word, a phenomenological way means to describe it through the things as they appear in our experience, and how this very experience is creating meaning, meaning which is not created through the abstract ideal thinking of the plan as the representation for the creation, organization, and ritualization of space, but through the relation of ourselves to our synthesized, materialized, and highly specific world. And I would like to quickly read the first very quick paragraph of Hal Foster's introduction to Return of the Real, which I think visualizes Roger Diener's observation in a very straightforward way when he writes, "Not long ago, I stood with a friend next to an artwork made of 4 wood beams laid in a long rectangle with a mirror set behind each corner so as to reflect the others. My friend, a conceptual artist, and I talked about the minimalist basis of such work, its reception by critics then, its elaboration by artists later, its significance for practitioners today, all of which are concerns of this book as well. Taken by our talk, we hardly noticed his little girl as she played on the beams. But then, signaled by her mother, we looked up to see her pass through the looking glass, into the hall of mirrors, the mise en abîme of beams. She moved farther and farther from us. And as she passed into the distance, she passed into the past as well. Yet, suddenly, there she was right behind us. All she had done was skip along the beams around the room, and there we were, a critic and an artist informed in contemporary art, taking to school by 6-year-old. Our theory, no match for her practice." So, by the time when we confronted ourselves with hundreds of images of unfurnished apartment interiors we were collecting from the web pages of Swiss architecture firms, the images started to pose a lot of questions, questions that we haven't been asked by the floor plan nor by the images of furnished or occupied interiors. That's when we decided to take the visitors of the Biennale on a journey to go on a so-called house tour through the Swiss housing interior in order to try to trigger a discourse about and trying really to understand the actual material matter of the architectural surface which we all inhabit. But what is very important to say at this point is that we not only looked at these images to understand the material architectural expression of today's apartment interior, but what we wanted to do is to seriously discuss them as a valid form of architectural representation. Similar to the floor plan, which is also a scientific subcategory within architectural discourse, we wanted to know what this kind of peculiar architectural representation means for us. What could be its weaknesses and what could be its potentials for architects. The reason for the existence of the image can be discussed in many different ways. One way would be to ask about the intentions of the architects themselves. Do they see their interiors as pure form with sculptural and non-functional characteristics? Do they suggest a neutral background for an unknown future occupant, but within the framework of a solid design? But another way would be to read the images as an expression of a collective state of being or as an evidence of a zeitgeist, which is not necessarily produced consciously by the architects, but out of a relation of influences, conditions, and histories that we inherited, starting with the emergence of affordable photo cameras and web pages. So why do architects take photos of their apartments in an unoccupied, naked, white way when these restricted interiors seem to not have any architectural value as such? Why, in contrast to interior photographs taken by real estate agencies, these images often depict a lot of white wall space with a window as a light source far away at the end of the image, consciously not revealing how spacious the room really is. Sometimes the windows aren't even visible. Often taken from a corridor, the images try to suggest spatial adjacency or depth by not showing the finite condition of an interior. This space, for example, could be endless. Sometimes the images are treated like a two-dimensional canvas, balancing graphic proportions and relations, almost forgetting that they're representing real three-dimensional space. These photos seem to emphasize the interaction of walls, apertures, and light with respect to the viewer's field of vision, giving recognition to the range of qualities, effects, and relationships that can be extracted from a simple and fundamental architectural palette. Things that you just can't see in a plan. And what makes these images so interesting for us is that they have a schizophrenic nature. Because as much as they claim to document and represent normality and reality, they also suggest a high amount of artificiality. Just try to imagine two lines sitting somewhere in the room, but no matter from which angle you look at them, one line always sits exactly on top of the other line, like here. This may seem a little bit manneristic at first, but for us, this image suggests that the space depicted here somehow is capable of following a set of absolutely new rules, rules that do not only apply to our physical reality. It's telling us a new story, which is different of the one that we are used to hear. If you look at it this way, the kitchen here in the room almost could free itself of its predetermined gendered reality. For our installation, this involves embracing the image's inability to convey scale, dimension, depth, or spatial adjacency. By doing so, we attempt to highlight the potential that we find in the architectural shell, namely its plasticity as a surface and its inherent topological behavior. Architectural representation is, more than anything else, capable of telling architectural stories, but also stories of culture, orientation, habituation, and ritualization. The good thing is that these stories or images don't need to show evidence of a minimum ceiling height of 240 centimeters, thank God. And in contrast to furnished images, we think images of empty flats tell these stories with so much more strength because they actually suggest that the architecture itself autonomously is capable of telling the story, which means it gives much more value to the architectural substance itself as a protagonist and not only as a serving infrastructure. I have some more. I flip. So, so what exactly is a house tour? To figure out how to do this or how to build a house tour, we identified some potentials or operations of the house tour. These operations informed the design of our pavilion. First of all, the house tour is an inversion of the public and the private. It creates a collective and a public view onto the interior, which we think is very substantial because architectural value and attention today seems to be created the most within public projects, and housing clearly should be seen as a public project. Secondly, in the house tour, the walls are granted the status of a facade because you are finally looking at the architectural surface of the interior, like you would look on it from the outside as the object onto the facade. The house tour creates a continuous image, which means that the interiors are not understood as one individual autonomous unit, but as portions of continuous surface, which stretches across Switzerland and also along the Western world, we would say, with, of course, some little differences. It establishes a plastic and topological surface, having the ability to be draped over any form or shape and to maintain its core operation and abilities. And the architectural shell of the house tour is detached from the occupant, and therefore also detached of our habitual notions of use. And this challenges us to challenge our habits. And last but not least, the architectural surface itself becomes a protagonist. This is a little side note, that the architectural surface becomes a protagonist was actually Le Corbusier's original argument for the white-walled interior in his text, A Coat of Whitewash, the law of Replein. In French it sounds better. His hierarchy was reversed, actually. Surface, determined thoughts, then actions, and then function, rather than the other way around. When he says in his text, imagine the results of the law of Replein. Every citizen is required to replace his hangings, his damasks, his wallpapers, his stencils with a plain coat of white Replein. His home is made clean. There are no more dirty, dark corners. Everything is shown as it is. Then comes inner cleanness, for the course adopted leads to refusal to allow anything at all which is not correct, authorized, intended, desired, thought out. No action before thought. Another big part why the images are have a high potential to us is when we started to realize that when you show someone an image of an unfurnished flat, mostly architects, there's an incredibly wide range of associations and responses. The images are open-ended and very similar to Rorschach tests, actually, in this way. There are multiple narratives or discussions embedded with the photograph of the empty and unfurnished apartment. To solicit these alternate readings, we gave an interdisciplinary group of writers hundreds of these house tour photographs, and their diverse contributions form the basis of our catalog. So what we actually did is, in the exhibition is our response to the images, and the catalog is the response of a group of 14 authors to the images.
Yeah, so I go over to more the methodology of the installation, like how we transformed the architectural material we discovered into the installation of the pavilion. So for us, the value of the house tour and its image lays not only in the ability to passively document the richness of those built artifacts, but also in its ability to actively frame and construct a very specific architectural vision. So our project looks to celebrate this overlooked architecture and its architectural representation. For us, architectural representation is understood not only as a means to document something, so like if we would just have hang all of those images in the pavilion, but as that which challenges the very act of perception altogether. So instead of representing a building, we built a representation. like this very big three-dimensional model. And this slightly shifts the focus of our project. So we would not longer build a house, but instead a house tour in the pavilion. So we really want to take the visitor on a journey through all of those images, through the landscape of the unfurnished apartment interior. So we started to analyze and reflect on like the compositional principles, graphical potentials, and sorted out moments which appeared over and over again. So which have characteristics, qualities, elements of surprises. And then worked back, like reconstructed the setting of the two-dimensional images. So how the drywall, the window, the kitchen cabinets are composed together with the lens of the camera, and how those scenes are staged. So the construction of the installation corresponds much more to the principle of the image rather than of those of the actual apartment. And the image's inability to show scale, dimensions, depth is presented to the viewer in built form. So instead of constructing the scene as they are in one-to-one and build a sole reflection of the actual apartment, it was also crucial in the exhibition to exaggerate the scenes and to speculate on the qualities in them. So all of those scenes, they're somehow manipulated, extended, displaced, distorted, scaled, of course, shifted, doubled, overlaid, and thereby densified. So this shifts the installation to a representation by its own to a new architectural genre and project instead of a representation of the apartment. And a lot of the times we were also asked what this scale is all about. But for us, scale is somehow only a tool to bring this background condition to the foreground. But of course, there are also all other tools we use, but the scale is most probably the strongest one. But it's not a project about scale. So what we discovered are tons of small moments we wanted to address by pointing at them and by transforming them to make them explicit. So interior scenes, as you can see here in one of our sketchbook, are constructed at a range of different scales and spliced together to create somehow a sequence of interior perspective, and by doing so to bring the background to the foreground, and the enclosure becomes decontextualized or alienated. So to go over a little bit to the actual construction and material palette, it was also always a question how artificial and how conventional can the installation be, so that on one side you're really familiar with the material, but on the other side are also irritated, or how much it can be abstracted, that it's somehow in the spirit of a three-dimensional model, and which parts have to be perfectly done to have a sense of the scale. So we basically worked with a very limited amount of building components, like a window, a door, a power plug, baseboards, and always at the same proportion. So like standard elements in a non-standard scale at the range between 1:2 and 2:1. And 240 was always the datum of the 1:1 scale. So whereas the measurements and the dimension is very familiar and standardized, I think all over the world almost. For example, with the window, it was much more difficult to find the one proportion which is really typical. And we also discovered then when the pavilion was finished that it's much easier to have, also for the visitors, to have a sense of the scale if the the material, the architectural material is unquestionable. So I think that's also why a lot of people in the end took images of the 2-to-1, like the gigantic door, but it's way more difficult to capture a sense of window where the material is not so clear. So same does the door handles. This was also quite nice that even if a shift of the scale of a door handle is also only a tiny little bit, you immediately realize that something is wrong. So these door handles, they're so familiar and common that it directly irritates you. So here we had the luck to work and collaborate with the firm in Switzerland, Klutz, who actually mass produce all those handles. And they have a small hand workshop for special production. So they managed somehow to put the scaled up door handles on top of the mechanic, which is still in the normative way. But here, I think this is one example of the components which had to be perfectly done and like really precise to have this feeling of the transformation. Here the gigantic and small power plugs. It's made in an art factory and they're sole representation, so of course they don't work. But even if they're really small, you somehow through the format and the arrangement of the plugins, you realize that you're somehow in the Swiss pavilion. This is the example of the floor. Of course, we couldn't use like normal wood planks, so we had to somehow find a way how to scale up the texture that it looks real, even if it's not. So we made images of the floor, of a regular wooden floor, and scaled the planks up and down, and in the end printed it on vinyl rolls and laid them down. So this was the moment when somehow the material of behind the surface, like all the drywall and the material you never see in the installation, arrived in Venice. We started, this was in March. We were the first pavilion. Everything was really quiet, but we already started and also discovered that it was so much material that when we moved it into the pavilion, couldn't even start. And this was actually also personally a moment where I thought somehow that it was too much, that it was so much material and it was somehow heavy, and it just looked like a really big effort, which in the end I realized it was also good that we had this moment, because when somehow the surface, like our argument, like the white finishing, the floor and the small details came into play, it completely went away. So it was not overwhelming anymore, but it became really somehow light and joyful. So yes, you will become a house tourist. So when you stand in front of those two doors, you will become a new subject, the house tourist. You will explore this well-known architecture as a still unexplored foreign territory. The banality of every day is falling off the walls, and your body starts to untrust everything that you're claiming to already know. So on one side, everything is familiar, but on the other side, it's completely unexpected. This is when you start realizing that this interior is not just a background that provides you with space. You need to perform your private lives, but this very interior shell itself starts to create a relationship to you. This is when you become a new character. The drywalls, the skirting boards, the door handles, the parquet also become character, creating a dialogue between you and themselves. So at first you only see 3 doors, which welcome you to take the tour. They're all a little bit in different dimensions, and you don't really know which one to take, so most probably you will decide to take the middle one. It looks the most regular, and the middle is always not so bad. You enter, you open it, and you realize that this is actually not a space to walk in. It's a perspectival space which is only made to look at. So you probably return and open the right one. Here you realize that it looks exactly the same. One is the image of the other one, but here the space is not distorted. So you can walk in and start the tour in this accessible space. So it's clear, the left is the image of the right one. In first place, everything looks familiar. Generous entrée, some built-in cabinets on the right. Great. Maybe only the really fat column in front of you is standing in your way, and maybe it irritates you a little bit, but you continue. You turn right and start slowly to realize that nothing is as you expected, and you find yourself in an impossible dwelling. So here we amplified, I think you saw it in the images before, like this very typical diagonal. And this was one of our main axes of the installation. So through the increasing, so the volumes are increasing to the end. But which is quite irritating is that the eyes, when you see it, they immediately correct somehow what you pretend to see. So you can't actually estimate what the actual size of the kitchen in the really end is. So you have to go there and see. Then you continue, you go through this gigantic door. You open it, but you're not a dwarf anymore, but you become a giant again. You find yourself in a typical loggia, like a quasi-outdoor space, indexed only by a change of the surface on the ground and by natural light, which is coming from above. The room sequence even continues outside of the pavilion, walls through a graphical extension of the space. So in some of the windows, we were supported by Shirana Jabazi, who speculated on the continuation of the space in the installation. This perfectly central placed power plug in the middle of the 2 door openings attract your full attention. And you're guided by the light. Continue to the next room. Find yourself in another really generous loggia. I think Switzerland is quite famous for loggias. Everyone likes loggias. In the back you see the small door you just entered. You continue and the plasticity of the drywall increases, and it almost gets really sculptural qualities. So the corridor gets longer and longer, the ceiling is falling down, and the space is getting more narrow. You again do a left change of the direction. You see a really clear framed window, which is only positioned there, and it's cut on both sides to capture this moment of the change of the direction. So if you go a little bit off your path, you realize that it's only staged. You pass by a curved surface and can enjoy the plasticity of the drywall. Then the room starts to be a little bit rotated to also, I think this is the moment when a lot of the visitors start to lose a little bit of orientation and don't know anymore where they actually are. But you can see this very small window where you can look back to the perspectival room again. The ceiling jumps all of a sudden, and you stand in front of an impossible kitchen counter, which is shifted and displaced. I think no one architect would ever do this. Now you can go outside again and look at the invisible object from the outside. So what we think we managed somehow is by the arrangement of those, we always call them nuggets, that we overcame the principal organization of the pavilion, of the plan. So the diagonal, for example, really works against the separation of the big, the medium, and the in-between, and the small principal exhibition space, or also through this really small door you can see through the whole pavilion. And through this, I think by losing the orientation, the pavilion looks much larger than it actually really is. So through the overlay of all those many scenes, they engage with one another. They're not kind of separated scenes anymore, but always the context for the other one. So in the end, it became one single topological surface, and you are in a continuous infinite interior and start to rethink how to use this interior.
Yes, so you saw now all the images we did of the pavilion empty, like the ones that we were studying. But actually, they have no traces of occupants. The only hint to a subject or an observer is through the lens of the camera itself, and therefore he or she was always invisible in the image. But for the construction of the house tour, it was always clear that the character of the house tourist, which is the temporary occupant of the space, constantly shifts from observer to observed, from subject to object, and to a dialogue with the architectural surface, and then sharing the role of the protagonists, and then back to observer, reflecting on the event. And yeah, I mean, Instagram was the perfect platform for us to be able to examine if we executed this idea successfully. The amount of Instagram posts were massive, really massive. It was the selfie pavilion, basically, as we can see. But yes, but this huge amount of joy, selfie potential, and desire to perform produced a playfulness from the side of the visitor, which we think is key to alternative readings, approaches, and views within housing everywhere, really. That's the little window looking back to the middle entrance. Yes, but not only normal people posted themselves on Instagram, but there were also some famous people. There was also Farshid Musafi, Norman Foster. He actually did a whole series. And not to forget Bjarke Ingels. And look at how many likes he got for that picture. 27,675. Yes, Instagram went crazy, which is actually, I think, a very positive thing for us. But then the coverage of print and digital media was and still is huge. If we look at all, yeah, I mean, this is only like, you know, a small amount of articles that were produced about the pavilion. This goes on, and of course we are still a little overwhelmed by it. But at the same time, the goal of this exhibition starts to get physical because it seems to create a discourse on various platforms through different medias and institutions. We heard several people talk about the project within final reviews and panels, and this is the current poster of Adam Caruso's design studio of this semester at the ETH about hidden interiors, where in his description he refers directly to our project, and so on. So it starts to really get people heard us, and it sounds like the interest is here to talk about it. Also, if not yet, it's not really clear how to talk about it yet. I think. I mean, there's still a lot of open questions. But we were deliberately focusing on a material for this exhibition that is not yet described within already existing written discursive project. This is why it's of a big importance to us to see the people of various disciplines, as well as architects, scholars, and politicians, that they are actually interested to start the discussion on the empty apartment interior with all the questions it poses, all the meanings it produces, and all the potential it inhabits. Thank you very much. If you have some questions, we are very willing to answer those.
Can I quickly say also something?
Yes, yeah, I think you can.
No, I mean, we always try to explain somehow how the project, but what we also realize that it's, I think you somehow have to go there and experience it by yourself. You somehow can't, on the images, it's always less strong than when you're in the Tradini.
Yes, that's true.
You can't capture it somehow. Yeah, that was a small remark. So the people who were not there, we would be happy if you go there. Take the chance until the November
27. Yes. Are there questions? Can we dim the light a little bit? I can't see barely anyone. Better. Perfect.
Des questions? Des questions? Bon alors, pour que vous pensiez à vos questions, je vais en poser une. Now I'm quite impressed by the physical and sensitive experience. So I haven't visited yet the pavilion, but looking at the images, we can understand that it's mainly a physical and sensitive experience to make the tour, and I'm impressed in the way that it refers to some artists making this kind of maybe similar experience, like Gregor Schneider or Mike Nelson, or in Switzerland, les frères Chapuisat. But it, in opposite to their proposal, your proposal is completely a proposal by architects. So how do you feel this at the same time proximity with experience proposed by artists and your specificity to translate or to find a purely architectural way to propose this experience?
Yeah, I think I mean it's a very tricky question, I think, because it's kind of the border between art exhibition and architecture exhibition is on the one hand very strong, because architecture exhibition is very different at the moment, at least. I mean, there are some movements into another direction, but on the other hand, we think it needs to open up. What? How do you exhibit architecture? How do you and in a context like the Biennale, where you know that you have the attention of the people maximum 2 minutes, and in the opening they come in and they like it, or if they like it they will stay 2 minutes. If they don't like it they will stay 10 seconds. So it's a big question. How do you make people aware of a topic without let them read 2 hours of text? And then we decided to do an installation. An installation like a spatial installation will often be compared to art installations, of course. The difference, I think, is that we all are experienced as architects, and Alessandro and I worked in Switzerland in architecture offices, drawing these plans we are talking about every day for competitions until our, everything hurts. So we are quite sensitive to this material. And I guess this makes the experience like this. I think this makes the difference to the experience, because we executed it. So it was always the idea that we find this border between this artificiality and the reality of the architectural world, or of real interiors. So we had to do this in such a precise manner, even it's not a house and it's not an apartment. It looks like, I mean, I had the experience when I worked, and when I walked in the first time when it was done, I thought I'm looking for a flat, and then that's the flat where I'm going to, I'm going to apply for. So I think it was very important that this, if you compare it to Gregor Schneider, which is a total different approach to the topic, it's history, it's used, it almost smells. It's much more related. It's much less related to the architecture itself, I think. Yeah. What was the point? You wanna?
Yes, not only one add. I think you explained it perfectly, but also the material we reflected on is clearly architectural. And then in the installation, I mean, we always saw it somehow as an architectural challenge. How to I mean, sometimes it was almost obsessive how to perfectly create this artificial world, and also to have this precision in. But I think with the question if it's art or architecture, it's also not clear if this strong line has to be, I mean, where it belongs to, as long as it is, it communicates a clear idea, I think.
And we won't sell it. I think this is also a point. Yeah, no, but yeah, I think, yeah, we are reflecting on an architectural topic, but we're reflecting also interdisciplinary topics. In that sense, it can be, you know, it's only a matter of rhetoric what it is, in which tiroir you want to push it. Yeah.
Among your visitors, did you have children? I should like to know if how did they react, because architecture is made for children too.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think this was one of the best moments actually, when the like really small kids, like not even 2 years old, they were in, and they were complete out of joy. I mean, they were the first doors they could open, and they got the concept. So they were really happy and running around, and were fascinated by the whole atmosphere.
Yeah, no, it was actually shocking, because we knew that children would react, you know. But for example, Alessandro has a son. How old is he?
2.
It's 2. He's 2, and when he entered that pavilion, of course, he knew his dad worked for it for more than a year, and he was never at home, so he knew it's something special. But when he entered this space, he went totally crazy. I mean, yeah, he couldn't hold himself. This was unbelievable. Kids, but also architects or adults kind of looked like they were kids again.
Yes, I mean, really, the most of the people from all of them, they had like really direct responses through their body language. Some were, I mean, of course, some people also didn't like it, but the most of them, they really had a smile when they entered the pavilion. They didn't come out with the same attitude as they went in. And this was actually also what we were always kind of selling this project, but we didn't know that it actually will work. So because you can't somehow plan it, you can't get a feeling of what it makes when everything is out of scale. But when some of the walls were built and you could get a little bit of the feeling how it will look like, at some point we realized that it will be working. That was also a good moment.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if that works. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have seen the pavilion, and I'm sorry to break your statistics, but we didn't stay 2 minutes, but maybe an hour or something, because the children didn't want to get out of it, and we didn't want to get out either. So I think the time is much longer than 2 minutes. It's more between half an hour and an hour, and because it's just not possible to you make several turns before you want to get out. But if you were a decisive politician or housing organizer in Switzerland about law legislation, what would you change? Because your critique is very obvious. If you would give you the job now to make things change, what would you do?
Yeah, that is, of course, a very, very tricky question. And of course, we don't have an answer for that. But in Switzerland, for example, at the moment there's a big discussion about deregulation of making the housing regulations less strong in order to make new ideas possible within housing. Maybe that could help. I don't know. I have no idea. But what I also a little bit have the impression is that it is not the norms and the regulations, not only the norms and regulations that are written down, but also the ones that are not written down. This is, of course, not only an architectural problem. This is something that concerns us all, and therefore, I'm not sure if there is a tool within the network of regulations and norms and laws that could really change anything.
No, I think it's also. I mean, we also wanted to address somehow the question to the users, that they start to think about also how they live without asking how they live. I mean, for example, it's a stupid example, but the white, the color of all those flats. I mean, if you see a plan, you never imagine that you will have an apartment which is completely red. So already the color, it's somehow in our collective consciousness that we don't question it anymore. And I mean, there are so many things which are not coming out of norms or standards, but they just became as they are, and they also don't go away so quickly anymore, I think.
Are you Suzy or Henry?
Ooh.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. But it's also, I think, also how we worked in our team. We were four people with kind of different backgrounds. So 2 from Switzerland, 2 from not Switzerland, and which is from the US and Finland. But what I want to say, what I think was really good, that somehow they came with a fresh eye to see Swiss housing, which I mean, personally, I had never questioned or thought there is such a big critique in the project. We could not formulate, but for them it was somehow not too much a problem. But then during the process, we always somehow changed Larry and Susie, and in the end, Matt, our colleague, was really into it and started to have a huge fascination for those interiors.
Mm-hmm. And who are you?
Yeah, I'm more Larry.
Yeah, no, I think a good mixture would be great. Yeah.
That's a good question.
There is another question over there.
Tonight we saw some plans. If I am not wrong, in your catalog there is no plans. So how do you choose the representation of your work in your catalog, of your installation, and how your work will live in the future in the paper? Or
Yes, I mean, we of course we didn't want to show. I mean, the idea for the book was in the beginning was kind of to create interior coffee table book, yes, like an architectural book, but in the spirit of an interior design book or an interior decoration book. It turned out a little bit different at the end, but the decision not to show the plan was clear from the beginning, because it was the idea to create a sensitivity for the elevation and try to let go, to let go a little bit of control. It was very funny, because when we started to gather around the authors for the book, one author was Martin Steinmann, which is an architect and an art historian from Switzerland, and he knows these images very well. He's very he knows a lot about housing, about Swiss housing. And when we asked him, because we met him for an interview, when we asked him to write a text, we confronted him with the images. His first reaction was, I need a plan. I need the plan. I can't write about it. I don't know what I'm seeing. I can't prove it. I can't. So this is kind of, the idea was to, for a short moment, let go of the plan. Now we are using it because we think it's also very interesting to see how this plan really looks in comparison to the images. What you see and what you see in the elevation and what you see on the plan.
It's the first time. It's actually the first time we showed the plan to
public.
So we always wanted to avoid to publish it, because then immediately everyone looks at the plan. I mean, it's I think it's somehow an architectural reflex that you want to have control and. I mean, it's the medium of communication. We communicate with one another.
Yes, but the nice thing, I think, looking at the plan now, after everything is done, is also that it is actually a huge corridor, and that you really can, even by looking, for me, even at looking only at the plan, I can already imagine all sorts of weird things going on in there. I mean, which flat has how many kitchens? 5 kitchens, 4 kitchens. What will you do in the kitchen? I mean, really, I mean, it's opening up, or it's giving space for speculation.
In the introduction and mention, we had almost 40 lectures on architecture. During all this evening, we saw mainly photos. And sometimes videos, but mainly photos, and a lot of plans as well. But it has been very rare that the architects made comments on what is photos of architecture, and that was your starting point, because as you show at the beginning with this grid of photos. So my question is very simple. Is there any analysis workshop or classes at the Helvetia about photos of architecture?
About what?
About photos, or about how to represent architecture.
Yes, there was last semester, in second last semester, there was Amy architects that did collaborate also with Shirana Shabazi, and they asked the students to design the spaces through the medium of photography. I personally don't know how this went. I think it's great, because also Amy themselves, they work a lot. I mean, the photography of their architecture was actually also one of the triggers to start this project, because they have really precise way of photographing their apartments, and sometimes they even use, they also use objects within, but when they use the objects, it's almost like a continuation of the surface. It's not, individualized objects, but every object is like very precisely set up in this kind of scene. So they're kind of masters, I would say, in that kind of genre. But other than this, I think Well, I think what Adam Caruso will do this semester is also kind of very elevational project. So it's coming. I have the impression that people are more aware of this, of the elevated view onto housing. Yeah.
Other questions? Maybe a last one, because it's so a specific project. So you mentioned you work more than 1 year, maybe only on this project. So what about now? How would you have as a digestion of the project, and what would be your next project together, I guess, or not?
Yes, we want to. Yeah, of course, we will continue to work together as long as long as it works out. At the moment, we are very happy and pleased to work with each other. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, as I mentioned before, it's important to us that it is not a project that ends with the finissage of the Biennale, which basically means that we want to create more discussion. We are talking about publishing another book about the aftermath of the project, but it needs a little bit of airspace and thought. But this is going to happen, I guess. What else?
Yes, I think we will, of course, continue with somehow the research and more outcomes of a reflection of it. So this is clearly not finished, but I think we will also we'll have other projects where we much more work with the methodology and try not only to stay in this topic now, but also tackle or speculate on other parts of in architecture.
Yes, of course. I mean, housing is a strong topic, but it's not the only topic that that is of interest to us. Yeah.
Okay, Li, Alessandro, thank you very much for this beautiful presentation, and we can continue with a drink in the foyer. Thank you.
Thank you very much.